Hi, this is Mike Young with Noble Warriors. You're about to hear a seminar titled America's Christian Heritage, presented by Chris Friend, the Vice President of Policy and Communications for the Family Foundation in Richmond, Virginia. This challenge was presented at the Iron Sharpens Iron Men's Conference in Fredericksburg, Virginia on March 19, 2011. My prayer is that this message will encourage you in your walk with Christ and better equip you to lead your family.
My name is Chris Friend, and thank you for coming out to the American Christian Heritage Seminar today. Just a really brief background for me. I'm work for an organization called the Family Foundation of Virginia. And I don't know if you all have heard of the Family Foundation. We are affiliated with Dr. Dobson's Focus on the Family. We're what we call a state policy council. And essentially what the Family Foundation does, our mission is to take biblical principle and apply it in the area of public policy, law and government. We lobby the Virginia General Assembly on family issues of life and marriage and parental authority, religious liberty, constitutional government. And we try to connect Christians with civil government and understand their biblical role in the realm of civil government, not make politics the mission of the church, but understand that if the church is going to affect culture, one of the ways the church is going to affect culture is by being involved in civic government. Our government makes decisions every day that affect your ability to minister to others, to practice your faith in public, and to speak out on issues that are values issues and that are important to biblical principles. So that's kind of the organization. I'm a vice president there, and I deal with a lot of our policy and communication and that kind of thing. In my life before that, I was a teacher, taught middle school and high school, and I taught government and history. And I've always had an interest in history. My dad was a World War II bomber pilot. He flew B-17s over Germany in World War II. When I was growing up, I heard those stories, and my dad talked about history, and history and patriotism were an important part of my family and my life, and I've always been interested in that area. I'm not a historian, okay, so I don't have all the answers about history. My goal today isn't to give you necessarily a comprehensive history lesson where you walk out of here and say, hey, you know, he knew everything. I don't know nearly everything about American history, but what I want to do is talk a little bit about why this issue is so important and talk a little bit about what the founding of our nation is and is really about. I don't want to deify our country. I don't want to deify our founders. Our founders were men. They had flaws. They made mistakes. I don't necessarily want to put the stamp of Christianity and say America was founded as a Christian nation on a nation that kept a large segment of its population enslaved. I don't want to do that and justify any of that because it's not biblically justifiable. But what I want to do is talk to you about the influence of Christianity and biblical belief in early America. I am supposed to tell you that CDs of this are available. Be aware the CD length is 75 minutes. It's a long car ride to listen to, but afterwards you'll be able to get this if you hear something you like, and hopefully today you'll be challenged and you'll learn something. And one of the things that I want to make sure that we understand is why this is important and why history is important. So I want to take you through a lesson. Now, I will tell you that everything you're about to see, I stole, okay? I plagiarized this entire presentation. All right, so I want to make note of that there is nothing here that's original to me, okay? Much of it is taken from the Truth Project, if any of you are familiar with the Truth Project and Focus on the Family, and also from David Barton and Wall Builders. And a couple of little things that I found I tripped over, so there's a slide or two in here that are actually mine to finish out the presentation. So some of you are going to recognize this. Don't give away the answers, okay? I'm going to start with a little quiz. So if you've seen this before, you already know. I don't want you to show how smart you are by giving away the answers. Okay. Can anyone tell me what that is? It looks like a 1. He's right. It is a 1. How did you know that? How did you know that's the number 1? Looks like a 1. It's not. How do you know? How do you know that that's a 1 and not a 2? You were taught that was a 1, correct? Yeah. You were taught that that is the number 1. What about that? 11. How do you know? How do you know that that's the 11? You were taught that somewhere along the way in your childhood. Someone taught you that that is the number 11. What about that? Emergency number. 911. Okay, now some of you jumped ahead, said 911. But notice one of the reactions is not 911, 911. Why? Why didn't everyone automatically go to 911, but some people went to 911? We've been programmed. We've been taught. If this was on a billboard along the highway and it was just 911, you'd say, why did they put 911 on a billboard? But when it's on a billboard as 911, you say 911 because culturally, in our culture, 911 means something different than 911. We've been taught that. And that number brings an entirely different set of circumstances into our beliefs, doesn't it? What happened on that day changes the entire picture of that 911 and that number. What's the definition of the past? Can anybody tell me what's the definition of the past? Things that have already occurred, something that happened. The statement, things that already occurred already. It just happened. It isn't happening now. It just did, right? It's already in the past. What's the definition of the future? Things that haven't occurred yet. Things that haven't occurred yet. And the present, right? The present, this moment right now, this very moment, is just that very thin line that's making the future become the past. That very thin line of moment by moment, the past taking place. History is happening every single moment. And what I want to teach you today, and what I want you to leave today, is understanding how powerful history is. If I can change your historical context, if I can change what you believe about the past, I can change what you believe about the present. That's the power of history and the power of historical revisionism. God is very, very, very interested in history. How do I know this? He told us over and over and over again. The word remember, particularly in the Old Testament, you hear the word remember over and over. A verse from Isaiah, remember the former things, those of long ago. I am God, and there is no other. I am God, there is none like me. I make known the end from the beginning. From ancient times, what is still to come, I say, my purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please. I was interested that in our keynote keynote's address, he mentioned what's the most sought after message that he has? Predestination and free will. Anybody ever debate that one? Yeah, we debate that in our office all the time. It's a blast. It is so much fun, and I tell everybody there that they may think that they don't have a choice, but I do. So you know where I'm coming from. But what's this talking about? This is talking about God's sovereignty. God's hand in history. From the east I summon the bird of prey, from the far-off land, a man to fulfill my purpose. What I have said, that I will bring about what I have planned, that I will do. Everything that has happened, okay, everything that has happened in history, these monumental events, down to the smallest thing, has been worked together for God's sovereign plan in history and for him to bring about what he wants. This is important. George Orwell said, "He who controls the past controls the future." He who controls the past controls the future. A people without a heritage are easily persuaded. Wow. Wow. Karl Marx. Wow. A people without a heritage are easily persuaded. Take away your history. Take away where you came from. Take away your roots. All right? And someone can control what you think about the present. About the present. This is well, let me back up just for 1 second. What was the first incident? The first incident of revisionist history. Of revisionist history in history. What did he say? The serpent. What did he say? Sure, did God really? What did he just do? He questioned the past, didn't he? He tried to get Adam and Eve to forget what happened previously, right? To make them question the reality of the past. He's been using it ever since. He has been using it ever since. This gentleman's name, who I'm not going to try to pronounce, I kept saying leotard, but he is a leader, modern-day leader, or scholar of postmodernism. Have you heard the word or the phrase postmodernism? Postmodernism, philosophers or educators kind of applying it to the postmodern age, the post-Christian age. Postmodernism is essentially the concept of our culture, our world, that there are no truth. There is no truth. It's not the truth is relative. The truth doesn't exist. Okay, it just takes everything that we've learned, everything that we understand about the past, and said none of it matters. Everybody is themselves. You're your own story. You're your own story. One of the things that he said is simplifying to extreme. I define postmodern, this postmodern age, as incredulity toward meta-narratives. Now, that's a really cool way of saying that a meta-narrative is a large story, okay? A larger story that pretends to give an all-encompassing explanation to everything, especially an overarching story of history and life in an attempt to legitimize some version of the truth. Now, in postmodernism, meta-narratives don't exist. There is no larger story. All right? There is no big story. So what postmodernism says is this isn't true. Okay? This history, this story that's bigger than you and I isn't true. The battle over history. The battle over history is truth. Okay, where's my little light? There it is. Truth and reality versus a lie. History is a story of God's providence, or history is a tool. I take what happened, I move it around a little bit, I make it fit what I want you to believe, and then I can make you believe anything about the present. In our country, in America, this is exactly what has happened with our history. This is exactly what's happened, because what we've done is we've tried to expunge and erase a huge influence in America's founding to convince everyone that we live in a secular society with a completely secular form of government that found absolutely no origin in the Bible or in biblical principle. Nothing could be further from the truth. But let me say, I'm not going to ask the question today, does America have a Christian heritage? Or is America a Christian nation? I don't think those are valid questions. The question is, did Christianity influence the founding of America? That's really the right question. Okay? Did Christianity influence the founding of America? And if so, how much? Was there what did the founders think of the Bible? Of what the Bible taught? Of the principles of the Bible? Did they have any idea? Were they completely driven by the Enlightenment, the European Enlightenment of the day, and Enlightenment principles? Were they deists? You know, a deist, which is what we hear today, all the founding fathers were deists. Sure, they believed in God, but God was something way out there, far away. He left humanity to deal with itself. And so, yeah, sure, there was a God, but he has nothing to do with what's happening every day. We've got to use our own reason. We've got to use our own intellect. We've got to use what we know to make sense of things here and run things in that way. There's no involvement of some God anywhere. Is that what they believed? Is that what the founders thought? Did Christianity in any way influence this country? This is where the history lesson begins, so you got to really perk up, because I know everybody loved history in school. I taught history, I know. It's like boring most of the time, names, dates, and places, and after a while you just are tired of the names and dates and places. But remember, I'm going to play the God card. God said, remember. Right? He said, remember. I wish I had had that verse when I was teaching. I should have been reading my Bible more. Remember. Not just so we can pass a test, but so we can remember his hand. Remember what he did for us and through people before us. When the original settlers came to America and landed at Jamestown, and by the way, when you go to Jamestown, you won't see any of this. Okay, when you get out and visit Jamestown, you're not going to find any of this on a poster on the wall. All right, you're not going to see this. But when they left, they got a charter. When they left England, a charter, something that gave them the legal power to do what they were doing, to go to the New World, to settle this land. It was like a contract. This is what you're going to do, okay? Now, this is what the charter, the first charter of Virginia said for those settlers who settled Jamestown in 1607. We greatly commending, graciously accepting of their desire for the furtherance of so noble a work by the providence of Almighty God, hereafter tend to the glory of his divine majesty in propagating of, what's that? Enlightenment? Propagating of enlightenment. No? Yeah. And propagating postmodernism, right? And propagating Christian religion to such people as yet live in darkness. Now, again, were there people who came to Jamestown who came for the money? Sure. Okay. Were there people that didn't have wonderful motives that came over on the first vote? Sure there were. Of course. We're human. That's what we do. Okay? But understand that in general, the purpose that was driving many of the people who crossed the Atlantic in a dingy wooden boat that stank and was miserable for weeks and weeks to come to Jamestown came to further the gospel of Jesus Christ and bring the gospel to people who were yet to hear it. You will not find that anywhere at Jamestown. A few years later, another group was on its way over to join the folks in Jamestown, to join the folks in Virginia. They were under that same charter, but they got blown off course. Okay, they got blown off course, and they ended up way up north, Massachusetts. Wasn't Massachusetts yet, of course, but that's where they ended up. Providence? Is that God's direction? Who knows? But when they got there, they realized they were off course. They were in a place where the charter that they had no merit, had no value, had no influence. And before they left that boat, the Mayflower, before they got on the land, they realized they had to have some kind of agreement. Okay? They needed government. Right? They needed government. You know what's great? You know what's great about government? I love government. You say, now wait a minute. Wait a minute. I thought all us Christians were right-wing Republican radicals who hated government. Well, here's the thing. Who gave us government? God gave us government. God gave us government because he realized that we need something that can give us boundaries, right? Order, social order. God is a God of social order. I love what God gave us, okay? Now, he gave some guidelines to that government, all right? But I love it. So they knew they needed a government. This is what they did. Mayflower Compact. You know what's amazing about the Mayflower Compact? Try to find it in its entirety in a textbook that's taught to most kids today. Try to find the words, in the name of God, amen. Try to find it, okay? In a lot of places, it's gone. We, whose names are unwritten by the grace of God, having undertaken for the glory of God and the advancement of the Enlightenment, the advancement of what? Christian faith and the honor of our King and country. Covenant. Boy, is that word a powerful word in the Bible, isn't it? Covenant. Agreement. Right? Covenant. God used covenant all the time. What an incredible word. Covenant. And combine ourselves together into a civil body politic for the better ordering, for our better ordering and preservation. Now, was everybody on the Mayflower a Christian? No. Was everybody there? Did they all have the same motives? No, they didn't. But in general, overall, they understood where they were and why they were there. And I'm going to come back to the Pilgrims at the end of this to talk about this larger story and their role in this larger story. Let's fast forward 100 years. Now, I just left out 100 years of history. You can thank me later. Okay? You can thank me later for expediting American history 100 years. Okay? Just like that. There'll be a quiz after. You're going to have to fill in the blanks there. Okay? What happened in those 100 years? This date. Okay? Anybody know what happened in 1787 that's kind of important in the history of the United States? Yeah, the Constitutional Convention. How about the fact that in Philadelphia, in I believe August of that year, August into September perhaps, they drafted the Constitution of the United States. Okay? That entirely secular document that has absolutely no basis in Christianity. Now, a month before that, these entirely secular founding fathers were meeting as a Congress, and they passed something called the Northwest Ordinance. This was essentially to apply to all these Northwest territories that were way, way, way out west, like Ohio, okay, and places that hadn't been settled yet that needed law. And they thought, you know what's really important for civilization? Education. People need to be educated. Religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind. Religion, morality. Now you have to understand something about the founders. They used the word religion a lot, okay? They used the word religion a lot. But religion didn't have a very diverse definition to the founders, okay? Because when you look back at what they were talking about when they used the word religion, 9 times out of 10, it was Christianity. Okay? It was Christianity. So you could, in effect, substitute the word Christianity for religion. So this entirely secular Congress that was creating an entirely godless country passed a law the month before they made the Constitution that says Christianity, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government. Okay? Okay. The month before. Now, either in that month, between the Northwest Ordinance and the Constitution, there was a radical change in philosophy in the United States, or the same men that met to pass the Northwest Ordinance who saw religion, Christianity, and morality as being essential to having a civil society also thought that when they created the document that is the controlling document for our country. Before I go to that one, another way that, and one of the things I'm not going to do today, I have a couple of quotes from the founders, but I'm not really going to talk about individual founders all that much, okay? Because they were all flawed. They all had, I can find contradictory quotes. I can find things that they said that are different. I'm not going to talk about them as individuals. What I'm going to talk about are the influences that they had in that time that helped them make their decisions, okay? So think about this. In the founding era, a national government was extraordinarily weak under the Articles of Confederation and debated for months under the Constitution because they feared a strong central government greatly. But they put a great deal of emphasis on their state government, okay? And that was really where their loyalties lied in a lot of places, was their state. Most of the men who went to the Constitutional Convention, who were part of this Congress, were also part of their state legislatures, or had been part of their state legislatures, okay? So you would think that that would have had a great influence on them, all right? This is just a couple of examples of this. You can find more in the other colonies. In Delaware, every person who shall be chosen a member of either house, so every person who's a member of the Delaware state legislature during the founding era, or appointed to office or a place of trust, shall make and subscribe to the following declaration. I do profess faith in God the Father and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, and in the Holy Ghost, one God, blessed forevermore. These secularists, how dare they bring God into government? Oh, it's a little vague. Yeah, that's right. That's right. It is. You're right. You're right. I guess you could fuse God the Father with something, you know. Yeah, Delaware, Pennsylvania. Each member, before he takes a seat, shall make and subscribe the following declaration. I do believe in one God, the Creator, Governor of the universe. We're getting a little deeper here. Okay. Rewarder of good, punisher of the wicked. I like that. Okay. We didn't know there was such a thing as wicked in postmodernism. Right? I do acknowledge the scriptures of the, see, now we're really, really starting to violate the whole separation of church and state thing here. Okay? Scriptures, Old and New Testament, to be given by divine inspiration. Folks, there are churches in America today that don't believe what the Founding Fathers did about the Bible. Okay? There are churches that don't believe what the Founding Fathers believe about the Bible. North Carolina, no person who shall deny the being of God. The truth of the Protestant religion, we're getting a little specific here. Okay. Or the divine authority, either of the Old or New Testaments, or who shall hold religious principles incompatible with the freedom and safety of the state, shall be capable of holding any office. Wow, what our country would look like if we required that of Congress. A few years ago, some scholars decided that they were going to find out who influenced these guys, who influenced the Founding Fathers, right? So they undertook a task, and they started to look at founding documents, documents written by the founders during the founding period from about 1750 up through the Constitution being ratified. Okay, during the War for Independence, or as my graduate school professor called it, the War for Continued Self-Government, because that's really what it was. All their writings, they looked at 15,000 documents. Because remember, back then they actually wrote, they didn't email. Okay, they actually wrote letters all the time. Can you imagine when it's going to be like 200 years from now for people to try to figure out what we meant by OMG in a text, right? They're not going to have a clue what we meant about anything, okay? It's crazy. 15,000 documents written by the Founding Fathers. In those documents, they found that the founders had quoted other people, other references around 3,100 times. All right? So they looked at those quotes. So who were the Founding Fathers quoting most often? Right? Because you would think that's what's influencing them. All right? What is that thing that they are, that book or that person that they're quoting the most? 3,154 quotes, the most often quoted resource, 34% of the time was the Bible. Almost 4 times more often than the next most quoted resource. The Bible. The Bible. Quoted by the founders more often than any other document that existed at the time. More quotes than any of the enlightened writers of the day. More often than anything. So would you think that the Bible must have had some kind of influence on the founders? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to blow your world a little bit. Because I know we hear all the time, 53 out of 56 of the Founding Fathers were Christians. I can't tell you if 10 out of the 20 of you are Christians. Okay? Much less what 56 people who lived over 200 years ago were. All right? I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to see some of those guys in heaven. I do know this. Okay? I do know this. Those 56 founders, and those were the people involved in the writing of the Declaration, the leading of the American Revolution, and the drafting of the Constitution. I know this. They had a better biblical worldview than most of the people sitting with us in the pews in America's churches today. Okay? They had a comprehensive biblical worldview. Now, whether or not they were Orthodox Christians that believed that Jesus Christ died on the cross for their sins, a lot of them did. Some of them didn't. Thomas Jefferson, I don't think, ever could come to grips with the supernatural power of God. And everything Thomas Jefferson talked about in his writings was not believing the deity of Christ, kind kind of an important little doctrine in Christianity, okay? But that doesn't mean that Thomas Jefferson didn't have a biblical worldview of government. It doesn't mean that he didn't believe the principles that were in there, okay? All right? Just because he didn't believe that element of the faith, I don't know that we're going to see Thomas Jefferson in heaven, but it doesn't mean that the Bible didn't influence his view of government. Education, we go back to that earlier slide. Education was a dominant theme during the founding era. And how do we educate? It's interesting that the two most popular books during the founding era, okay, during colonial days, number one was the Bible, all right, the best-selling book in the history of the world. Right? It was still a bestseller even though you couldn't get it at Barnes & Noble in the founding era. The second best-selling book was this one, called the New England Primer. You can still get the New England Primer today, by the way. You can still get copies of it. You ought to buy one. It's like $6 or $8 or something like that. It was used to educate children throughout the colonies. All right? It was used to educate the founders in many cases and their children. Okay? All the way through. Look, 5 million copies existed and there were 4 million people in America in 1776. This was a popular book, people. Okay, this was a popular book during that day. And I don't think you're going to be able to read this, okay? But I'll come up here a little bit closer. And all through here, this is how kids learned how to read, how to learn how to write, how they learned letters, all right? They also were asked questions all the way through it. Who was the first man? Adam. Who was the first female? Eve. Who was the first murderer? Cain. Who was the first martyr? Abel. These sound like Enlightenment figures. Are these folks from the Enlightenment all the way down? Oh, it gets better. Here is the alphabet, okay, and how they learned the alphabet. And this beginning paragraph, what's right and good now, right? Lord, show me, Lord, and lead me by thy grace and word. Thus shall I be a child of God. So they learned A. A, wife. See, some of this language is just really weird. These are all biblical verses. All of them. Let me read one I can actually. Oh, come unto Christ, all ye that are labor and heavy laden, and he will give you rest. All verses. Except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Holiness becomes God. Yeah. All the way through. It is essentially the first Sunday school book. Okay? You want to, you got grandkids, you got kids, you got grandkids that are just growing up, just learning. Buy this book and start teaching them the English language through this book. Because you know what? You're going to teach them more than they're probably going to learn in Sunday school. $7 at Amazon. Well worth it. Go buy one and look. The second most popular book of the colonies of the founding era. The influence, right? Education. Now, college was another story, because y'all have heard of Harvard, right? Now, would you consider Harvard a secular university? Just a little bit, right? Right. It's just a little bit. That wasn't a hard question, okay? This is, all right, from Harvard's founding in 1636, some of its original documentation. Let every student be plainly instructed and earnestly pressed to consider well. The main end of life and studies is to know God and Jesus Christ. Harvard was founded essentially to train pastors, okay? And therefore lay Christ at the bottom as the only foundation of all sound knowledge and learning. Okay, so are we getting the picture of what the founding fathers learned growing up? Okay. Princeton, cursed is all learning that is contrary to the cross of Jesus Christ. I don't think you're going to find that anywhere at Princeton these days. Okay? Many of our founders went through Harvard and Princeton as they were growing up. The foundation that they had in their education was Christianity and a biblical worldview. They had a comprehensive biblical worldview before it was a really cool name that we use today to say they knew what the Bible said, okay, and understood what God taught. Now, if I asked you guys to start naming founding fathers, do you think we could name all 56? No. Who could we name? We could name Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, Adams, because he did a really cool HBO series, right? Okay. You know, Hamilton, the guy with the really big signature, right? But a lot of people, have you ever heard of Benjamin Rush? Right? Heard of Benjamin? Benjamin Rush was one of the founders, okay? Benjamin Rush believed absolutely in the importance of education. Now, this is a great statement. In contemplating political institutions, now this is a little later, okay, this is 1798. All right, this is after everything is settled, right? Okay, we have our Constitution, but contemplating political institutions in the United States, I lament we waste so much time and money in punishing crimes and take so little pains to prevent them. We've learned a lot since 1798, haven't we? We profess to be Republicans. Now, he wasn't talking party there. He was using the phrase Republicans as a Republican form of government. It was a common phrase. Okay, I don't know what party he belonged to. Yet we neglect the only means of establishing and perpetuating our Republican forms of government. That is the universal education of our youth in the principles of Christianity and by the means of the Bible. Benjamin Rush was a signer of the Declaration. He was a ratifier of the Constitution. He founded 5 colleges and universities during the founding period. He was the founder of the first abolition society in America. He was the founder of the Sunday school movement in the United States, considered by his contemporaries, considered by the other 55 guys that he was working with as to be one of the 3 most influential founders. How many kids in public school today have ever heard, the only time they hear the word rush isn't in a good context, okay? Have never heard of Benjamin Rush. Okay, I'm going to throw out a couple of quotes to you just because what's a history lesson without a quote, right? Okay, we've got to have a quote or two from history just to round out the curve here and make sure that we've got a couple. Going back to these secular founding fathers that had nothing to do with Christianity, I'm just going to do a couple of them, okay? Your homework assignment is to go find more. Patrick Henry, you've all heard of him, I think, okay? In a letter that he wrote to his daughter in 1776. Among the strange things said of me, I hear it is said by the deists that I am of their number, and indeed that some good people think I am no Christian. This thought gives me much more pain than the appellation of Tory, because I think religion of infinitely higher importance than politics. And I love this, I find much cause to reproach myself that I have lived so long and have given no decided and public proofs of my being a Christian. Wow. Now, there's a whole sermon just on that last line. I've lived so long and have given no decided and public proofs of my being a Christian. Now, he did, of course, but guess what people of his day were doing? They were practicing revisionist history already and saying, oh no, he's not a Christian. He's not a Christian. This is one of my favorite quotes of all the founding. Benjamin Franklin was probably not an Orthodox Christian, okay? Probably not an Orthodox Christian. But he is considered by modern historians one of the leading deists of the day. Again, deist, okay? God came, created us, made everything, flew the coop, left everything to ourselves, doesn't have any involvement in what's going on. 1787, the Constitutional Convention was at a standstill. It was a mess. They couldn't agree on anything. They were about ready to go home. Okay? Benjamin Franklin's a little advanced in years at this time. And one day, Benjamin Franklin stands up on the floor of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, and he gives a speech. Now, when Benjamin Franklin gave a speech, people listened. Okay? He was respected. This is part of his speech. I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this, that God governs in the affairs of men. Not very deistic, but very Christian. And if a sparrow cannot fall without his notice, is it probable an empire can rise without his aid? Know what else? He kind of knew the Bible. Didn't he? Yeah, he kind of knew the Bible. We have been assured, sir, in the sacred writings that except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. I firmly believe this. He went on to say, guys, if we're going to do this, we got to get God involved in it. The least we should do is start every day with a prayer. Okay? With a prayer. Now, what our modern historians will tell you, yeah, but they voted to not pay somebody to do that. So see, they didn't believe in God. They didn't pay anybody to do it because they didn't have any money. They were broke. But from that point on, in every single day since then that Congress has met, guess what? They open with prayer. They open with prayer. I got to move along a little bit quicker. I knew I'd talk too much. The first printed English Bible, Bible of the Revolution, or the Aitken Bible, okay, it was printed by the authorization of Congress in 1781. Authorization, why in the world would Congress have to authorize, say it's okay to print a Bible? Well, guess what? They came from England. And in England, you couldn't print an English Bible. Here's an interesting fact. You could print a Bible in any other language you wanted to in the United States up to this, or in the colonies up to this point, except English. Okay, except English. It was forbidden in England to have an English Bible. In 1781, Congress voted to authorize the passage of this particular Bible. And on the inscription in the first page of this Bible, okay, hard to see, but our knowledge of your piety and public spirit leads us without apology to recommend your, and this was Aitken, they're writing to your particular attention, the addition of the Holy Scriptures. Resolved that the United States in Congress assembled highly approve the pious and laudable undertaking of Mr. Aitken, which is to print the Bible in English, as subservient to the interests of religion, as well as the influence of progress in the arts, and being satisfied from the above report, this care and accuracy in the execution of the work. You know what they did? They did what every Congress does. They formed a committee. And the committee was tasked with making sure the Bible that was going to be printed was accurate. Whoa, they didn't want any fly-by-night Bible printed. They wanted to make sure that the Bible that they were going to, what's this word down here? Recommend this edition of the Bible to the inhabitants of the United States. Wow, were they violating the First Amendment there? Okay. Wow, what are these guys thinking? They wanted to make sure, if they're going to recommend a Bible, if they're going to authorize a Bible, that it's right, that it's accurate. Hey, really quickly, again, did Christianity influence the founding of America? Not was America Christian. Okay. I'll let you decide that. All right. Did Christianity influence? You ever wonder where we got three branches of government from? How about Isaiah 33:22? For the Lord is our judge, judicial branch. The Lord is our lawgiver, legislative branch. The Lord is our king, executive branch. And you thought it came from the Romans, from the Enlightenment. Guess what? Tax exemption of churches. Do you think they were just being nice? Ezra. Not be lawful to impose a toll, tribute, or custom upon them. Section 1, or Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution. To establish a uniform rule of naturalization. Leviticus 19:34, stranger dwelleth with you, shall be unto you as one born among you. You know what this right here is? They shall love him as thyself, for you were strangers. You know what that is? This is a uniform rule of naturalization. Foreigner comes, you treat them well. That is a uniform code of naturalization. Article 2, Section 1, no person except a natural-born citizen or citizen of the United States shall be eligible to be president. Deuteronomy 17:25, one from among thy brethren shall thou set king over thee. Did Christianity influence the founding of America? A little bit. No person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of two, at the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. Get the picture here? This is just a few, guys. Okay, this is just a few, a sampling of what happened. Now, if Christianity did in fact influence the founding of the United States, all right, if all this revisionist history is inaccurate, okay, and if we go back and we see these influence, what does that mean in the area of religious liberty in the United States? Is a public prayer unconstitutional when the founders wrote the document by opening with prayer? Okay? What does it mean in the area of life and protecting human life? And again, the founders weren't perfect. They allowed a horrific institution of slavery. They did, okay? And we could argue from one end of the spectrum to the other, well, we wouldn't have gotten a country if they hadn't done that. It's the only way they could do it, yada, yada. You know what? They allowed slavery. It was wrong, okay? They made mistakes. They are not perfect. And we have to be willing to say that. We have to be willing to say that. But the influence of Christianity on them, absolutely no question about it. So what's your role? What's your role in all of this? Why does this even matter? Why does this even matter? I work for an organization called the Family Foundation of Virginia. Right in the back here, Roger Pogge, raise your hand. Roger works with me. He's our grassroots director. I will tell you something. If people in our churches understood American history and actually had a Christian worldview, I'd be out of a job. I would be out of a job. I would not have to be in Richmond lobbying legislators on marriage being between a man and a woman. Okay? I would not have to do that. I would not have to be in Richmond lobbying legislators on protecting unborn life if we understood the founding of America, the biblical principles that drove our founders, and if we had a comprehensive biblical worldview in our churches. I wouldn't have to do this. Roger would not have to be here. I would not have to be here. Oh, we'd still have problems out there, but you know what? Our government would be reflective of these principles. I would not have to be trying to protect people's property rights when one of the founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, said life, liberty, happiness was property. The ability to succeed, okay? The freedom to try, at least. If Christianity influenced our founding, all of these areas of our life take on a whole different perspective. And our job, okay, remember back at the beginning? Remember, is to remember and make sure that our kids remember and know. I said I would come back to the Pilgrims and this whole idea of a bigger story. We live in this postmodern culture that takes this larger story and says, there's no larger story, there's no big picture here, there's your story and your story and your story and your story and you and you and you. When the Pilgrims landed in that November 1620, they were going into winter. And, maybe 4 times as many, 5 times as many people as are in this room right now. And they were not prepared for what they were going to face. And by the end of that first winter, by the end of that first winter, in the field next to their settlement were 47 graves. 47 graves. All right? With the captain of the ship pleading with them, let's go back. We're going to die. You're not going to make it. You're not going to make it. More people than are in this room. Their graves were there. If it had been about them, they'd have gone home. Okay. William Bradford was one of them and the historian of the time, but these things did not dismay them. These things being the misery, the suffering they went through. For their desires were set on the ways of God, and to enjoy His ordinances. But they rested on His providence and knew whom they had believed. Last and not least, they, the Pilgrims, cherished a great hope and inward zeal of laying good foundations, or at least of making some way toward it. These people were dying, all right? Their families were dying. Their children, their wives, their neighbors were dying. They had an inward zeal of laying a good foundation, or at least of making some way toward it. For what? Propagation and advancement of the gospel of the kingdom of Christ in the remote parts of the world. And this is what's incredible. Even though they should be but stepping stones to others in the performance of so great a work, without a big story. There are no stepping stones without a bigger story, right? You're not going to be a stepping stone for anybody. For anybody, if there isn't a bigger story. All right? That's what they did. They said, I'll be a stepping stone. I will lay down my life for the bigger story, for God's story, for the advancement of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Oh, that we had the same zeal. Whoops, wrong button. That's all right. Oh, that we have the same zeal for Christ that they did. I hope that I at least piqued your interest a little bit in this whole idea of American history and America's founding. I hope that, number one, like I said, I've piqued your interest. Number two, that you don't take me at my word. I tell this to my Sunday school class that I teach. I tell this anytime I speak in a church. Go home and prove me right. Go home and prove me wrong. Go home and find out. Study, dig, look for yourself. Don't take my word for it, okay? Don't take my word for it. Find out for yourself, okay? Don't go reading other people's books. Go to the bookstore and find the writings of Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and read the founders themselves. Now, read it the first time, then understand that you have absolutely no idea what it's saying, okay, because they wrote in ways that we have a hard time comprehending, because after all, they were just dumb farmers. They didn't have all this great education and the internet and everything. I used to, when I taught history, I gave to my students in high school a copy of the Federalist Papers. Y'all familiar with the Federalist Papers? Federalist Papers were the letters written to convince people to vote for the Constitution. And I said, now look, guys, I understand this was just written to farmers. It was written to a bunch of hicks living in the woods, okay? So I know, but just read it and see if you learn anything. And they'd be seniors in high school, and they'd come in the next day, and they'd go, huh? I don't understand. This doesn't make any sense. What in the world is this? I'd say, this is what we call English. All right? This is what we call English. What you speak isn't English. But this was what they said. Buy the Federalist Papers. Read them. There's a great book called The Miracle at Philadelphia about the Constitution that quotes the founders. Okay? Find out for yourself. A couple great resources. Again, the Truth Project in my, as I said earlier, this was almost entirely plagiarized from the Truth Project and from Wall Builders. Okay? So I say that over and over again. So when the CD goes out and, I stole this, I just want everybody to know so that the right people get the credit, okay? If you haven't done the Truth Project, I really encourage you to do the Truth Project in your church. It is awesome. And not just on this, this is just one segment, but the comprehensive worldview. Wallbuilders.com is a great resource for a lot of this. We've got a couple minutes left. I don't know if anybody has any questions that you want to ask. I probably don't have an answer, but I'll ask Roger if he has any. Yes?
Something in my own personal life. Often, as a science person, I learned to go back to the source.
Mm-hmm.
The origin, But it wasn't until the mid-90s that I read a book that's gone beyond this period of time. Because all my life I've heard the term being an Uncle Tom.
Mm-hmm.
It was definitely negative.
Mm-hmm.
So I did the logical thing. I read Uncle Tom's chapter.
Mm-hmm. 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 We don't make the effort to learn the truth a lot of times. And we are so pampered in our culture. We're spoon-fed. Go to the Christian bookstore, for crying out loud. You've got every book and video and CD and yada, yada. We're the most CD, DVD, small grouped, whatever culture in Christian history. But we don't have a comprehensive biblical worldview because we don't go to the source, right? We don't go to the source. We don't actually get into His Word. Well, history is the same way. You can't know what really happened unless you go to the source and really look at what's there. Time consuming, you bet, okay? And obviously you can find trusted resources. I think David Barton and Wall Builders is a trusted resource. Are they perfect? No, they've made mistakes along the way. They've used some quotes that they found out later were not verifiable and they've since removed them and that kind of thing. That's going to happen, okay? That's going to happen. But I think overall you can learn a great deal from organizations and groups like that. But the key is, if you don't understand your heritage, if you don't understand the real founding of America, you're controllable by influences in our culture that want you to think a certain way. Yeah.
With this publication in 1781, when they published the first Bible,
Mm-hmm.
if these guys were supposed to be like uneducated farmers, where did they get the knowledge to understand the truths about God's Word?
Oh, yeah.
To bring them down to where they could understand?
Where did they? Well, that was what they grew up on. That was how they were educated. That's my point. I was being sarcastic.
Right.
Yeah, they were far more educated than we are today in a lot of ways, and their entire education was biblically based all the way up. So they understood they didn't just understand the Scripture, they understood the application of the Scripture, which is why you saw the scriptural references to the constitutional principles. Okay, they could apply it. They could actually make it practical and say, wow, this works. And yes, did history affect their designing of America? Of course it did. Did the Enlightenment in some ways affect their designing of America? Of course it did. We would be foolish to think that history didn't affect them. They just came from countries where the church and state were like this, right? Didn't work so well. Didn't work so well. Did they want to have the church and state separate entities? Of course they did. They did not want a state church. They did not want, quite frankly, they didn't want the church tainted by that. Did that mean that there was absolutely no influence of Christianity or religion in the application of that? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Yeah. They understood, and I didn't even get into all of the statements, and there's just a plethora of statements by the founders about why having, well, that Northwest Ordinance, religion, morality, Christian principles as the foundation of Republican form of government, of constitutional form of government, that they understood. Adam said it best when he said, our Constitution is made for a moral people. It is wholly inadequate for any other. Guess why we're having trouble in America today holding our country together by our Constitution? Because you know what? Our Constitution today is wholly inadequate for our country because we're not a moral people. And they got that. They saw that. They saw self-government and those principles as being the only way this form of government can survive. Because this form of government said you're free to make your own decisions. You're free to live your own life. You're free to get property, to have a job, to be educated. Your only requirement is that you live a moral life and not take from others and not steal and cheat and lie and have the breakdown of that foundation. They got that. They got that. Okay? They absolutely got that. One last thing I do want to mention, Roger, do you have the handouts or did you bring up? Okay, if you're interested in learning more about the Family Foundation, about what we do, Roger's got a handout. We work in the legislature on public policy. But something we've learned over the years, I'm a lobbyist by trade. Okay, that's what I do. I know that's a terrible word. Okay, that a lobbyist. Oh no, but essentially I try to educate legislators on biblical principles that affect public policy. But something I've learned over the years, and I've been doing this for over a decade, is that there are legislators that it doesn't matter how much I talk to them, they are never going to agree with me. Okay. I can't change their mind. Their worldview is utterly opposite of mine. And no matter how smart I am, no matter, and I'm not that smart, but no matter how much information I give them, no matter how much evidence I give them, I'm not going to change their mind. The only way that I can get done what I need to get done is to change them and to put different people in office that agree with me and agree with our principles. And that's why during election years we do something called Winning Matters, okay? Because winning elections matters. And I'm not talking about party, Republican, Democrat. I just want people who have a biblical worldview, okay? Or at least understand that, you know what, marriage is between a man and a woman, and we ought to protect that. The human life is sacred, and we need to do everything we can to protect human life. Our government's too big and too imposing, and we need to fix that. That our religious liberty, that we need the right not to work. Okay, we don't have a right to worship in the Constitution. We have a right to exercise our faith, and that means doing things. Okay, we need to protect that. So this is just a handout. If you want to get more information on helping us, this year's an election year in Virginia. 140 members of the State General Assembly. 100 in the House, 40 in the Senate are up for re-election. We can change a lot about the future of the Commonwealth if we elect people that have some of the same beliefs that we do. So we're going to be working on that this year. Thank you guys for coming today. I hope that it was worth the hour and few minutes you were in here.
I trust that this message has challenged you and motivated you to take bold steps of faith to advance the kingdom. We are thankful for the help and support we've received on these recordings from Morris Audio Consulting. Visit them on the web at morrisaudioconsulting.com. We also hope you'll take time to learn more about Noble Warriors and the Iron Sharpens Iron Men's Conference Network by visiting noblewarriors.org. God bless you, friend.